Hello, students. Dr. Nathanson here. Thanks for joining me for our discussion on motivation. Motivation is, I think, one of the most misunderstood areas of human behavior. And I guess I have three objectives in this lecture. One is for you to understand, a little bit about the theories which form the foundation of motivation. And two is why, despite a lot of evidence that things like reward and punishment tend not to work too well in the long term, do we continue to use this in schools, in our families, and at work? And three, I want you to be able to think a little deeper about, what motivates you and why. Is it internal? Is it external? Where does it come from? When I think of motivation, I think of a river, that's flowing. Imagine right now a river that was flowing, unobstructed. That's when motivation, I think, is the highest. And now imagine a river that's kind of up, full of logs and debris, and now the water can't quite get to where it wants to go. And that's what it feels when, I think, when someone is not motivated. One of the ways to think about motivation is a model that I like to use from Mahatma Csikszentmihalyi, a professor in the Midwest who wrote a great book called Flow. It's probably the best book I've read on motivation. And I've adapted his model a little bit on this slide just to show you what I think is important. Imagine you had a job, for example, that was really challenging, but you didn't know how to do it. How might you feel? Well, looking at this chart, I think you would probably have a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety, and maybe for one day that's okay, but clearly if you had that for a long period of time or even a few days, you're not going to be motivated. So one way not to be motivated is to really do anything in life, but in the context of work, which we're discussing here, is to do activities that, for example, at work that are challenging, but you really don't have a path, you don't have the skills to do it. And conversely, can you imagine if you had a job that wasn't challenging and you felt like you had a lot of skills? How would you feel? Bored. You wouldn't care much, and therefore you wouldn't be motivated. The third way not to be motivated, imagine this: you had a job that wasn't challenging and you didn't know how to do it anyway. For me, it would be like working at McDonald's. At the end of the day, I'd probably get fired next to the teenager because I'm not good at it, and it's not very motivating to me. It's not challenging to me at this point in my life. So often when you're doing a task which is not challenging and you don't know how to do it, of course, motivation is low. And so what does that leave us? It leaves us with the concept of matching high challenges and high skills. That is, if you can do work that's challenging, it's not easy, but you can match it with the right skills, and motivation is going to be the highest. I'm a speaker, and I've given talks to 2 people, and I've given talks to 1,000 people. And in either case, the talk was challenging because it was a different audience, a different context, and so on. And yet I felt like I'm pretty good at it, so I was able to match high challenge and high skills, regardless of the situation. So I think that's the best way to be motivated, is to really think about what can you do that for sure is challenging, so you won't be bored, but you also have the right skills. Some other things to consider when it comes to motivation is the idea of matching abilities and interest. I'm often asked, what does it take to have joyful work? And my answer is, if I had 2 minutes to teach you anything about that, I would say take a piece of paper and write down, what are you really good at and what are you interested in? And then try to match them, right? And try to find the alignment between abilities and interest. That's where vocational passion is. And I think that's where motivation is the highest. When you're doing things that you're good at and, they match with what you're interested in. Imagine you were interested in something, but you didn't have the abilities, you would be motivated to learn, which is different from, just being good at something, but then, no longer being motivated. And so you probably wouldn't work on it anymore. I think the idea of fulfillment is important when it comes to motivation. Just like eating an ice cream on a hot summer day or eating a fine meal, if your work is not, or anything that you do is not fulfilling, you're not going to be motivated. Meaning is really important. You know, if you personally can't find meaning in what you do, it's hard to be motivated. I think at work, people would rather talk about their romantic lives than this word called happiness. Martin Seligman, a British researcher, said that to be happy, three things have to be in place. You have to do what you enjoy. You have to do things that feel like you're moving forward, and you have to do things around people that you also really enjoy and are doing similar things. And so that the H word, the happiness, is really important. Now, all of these, of course, is subjective, but if you are not happy, it's going to be very hard to be motivated. So make sure that when you consider doing any type of work, for an example, you're going to feel happy doing it. And lastly, is it ecologically sound? And that is, make sure that the things that motivate you don't hurt others. So just briefly, that there's kind of two sets of theories that I could put in two buckets for you to understand this. There's what's called content theories and process theories. So content theories deal with what motivates people. For example, this is an area that I'm most interested in. You've probably heard by now of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this was one of the first models that really was a pure content theory. Let's take a look at his model here for a second. Maslow had a pyramid, and at the top he said, if your physical needs aren't met, you're not going to be motivated. So if you're not warm enough, and if you don't have water and fresh air and human touch, it's hard to be motivated. And then he said, once those things are in place, you have to feel secure. If you wake up in the morning and you feel like something might happen to you bad, then it's hard to be motivated. And this can happen when there's any kind of a crisis going on. And then Maslow believed once those two levels were in place, it's really important to find other people that care about you and that you care about. And all it takes is just one friend, someone you can go to or someone who can go to you. If that's not in place, it's still going to be very hard to be motivated. And a lot of my work has dealt with the last three branches, if you will, of Maslow's tree, which is, it's important to be self-aware, to have high self-esteem. If you don't feel good about yourself, it's going to be hard to be motivated. And then finally, as we get, in the middle part of our lives, sometimes a little bit earlier, we start to look outside of ourselves, to ask ourselves, how can I make a difference in the world? So this is an example of a content theory. Some other examples, Alder came along in the 1970s, about 20 years later than Maslow. And he added a few things to Maslow's model, which I think are pretty good. He said that, you could always move backwards at any time on this model. So for example, if you're feeling good about yourself, you have good relationships in your life and you're secure and so on, and then all of a sudden you lose a relationship, you have a breakup, you can move backwards on Maslow's hierarchy of needs scale. So I think that's important to understand, that you always have to work on all of these things, whether it's your relationship or your self-esteem or your work, to keep motivated. So motivation, once it's reached, doesn't just stay there. You have to continue to work at it. McClellan and Hertzberg had also some interesting theories that related to content theories. Let's take a look at that. Let's see, Hertzberg, he focused his research on the workplace, and he said that, if he was to take, 100 people, he would divide them up, and half of them would be motivated by avoiding pain. In other words, making sure not to take risks, to ask permission, to kind of just, avoid pain. And that was a strategy in life that they used for motivation. And he said the other half would be motivated, by gaining pleasure, being proactive versus reactive, seeking to develop, not afraid to try new things without getting permission. But what Hertzberg said, which I think was very valuable with his research, was that, most of us want the same things when it comes to motivation, especially at work, whether it's salary, status, good boss, and so on. But at some point, that's not enough. And that's where the idea of personal growth is really important for motivation. Let's see, I think I had a slide on McClellan. McClellan also said that to be motivated, you have to have some sense of achievement. That's why it's so important to have goals and to make goals measurable and achievable, so you're motivated. McClellan also said that it's important to have some autonomy over your work and have some affiliation. One of the reasons that you probably like LinkedIn or any of the social media platforms is because it gives us affiliation. We have a need to be connected to others. Okay, so these are all examples of process theories, which I think are very important. I'm sorry, content theories. And again, content theories deal with, what motivates people, right? So if you're interested in content theories, you're always asking the question, what really motivates you? The second bucket, is really process theories. And process theories deal with, how people are motivated. So if you're interested in process theories, I'm not so much interested in like, what motivates you, but I want to know what I can do. What are the things that get you to be motivated? Of course, one of the most popular theorists is B.F. Skinner. He, in the 1950s, did a lot of experiments with animals and came to the conclusion that people are lazy, and unless you promise them a reward or threaten them with punishment, they won't make much progress. And so his famous studies led to his conclusion that, you really had to, promise someone a reward or threaten them with punishment if you wanted them to be motivated. And of course, 99% of parenting strategies and schools and workplaces use this carrot and stick model, which, by the way, was based on his experiments with animals. So I'll just let you think about that for a moment. Other theorists contributed to process theories. Vroom said, to be motivated, you have to expect success, which kind of makes sense. If you don't expect that you're going to be successful at something, it's really hard to be motivated. Adams said that people have to be motivated, things have to be fair. So if things aren't fair, I'm not going to be motivated. And Locke added goal theory to the idea of process theories, goal setting. The idea is, to be motivated, you have to have goals. And, I agree with that. I think that's why goals are so important. Okay, so we have content theories, we have process theories. I've given you a couple of videos to look at it on your own that I think are really fascinating. The first link here is the last talk by B.F. Skinner about 8 days before he died. He I believe he had leukemia, and in his last talk, he still was as passionate as ever about his theory that people are lazy, and unless society will break down unless you reward or punish people to get them to be motivated. And by looking at this video, you'll really see his belief and conviction. On the other hand, the second link by Noam Chomsky, considered by many to be one of the greatest scholars of all time. He's written over 100 books, and he talks about the importance of cognitive psychology, which deals with, really from Dr. Chomsky's view, motivation is really internal. It has to do with our mental processes. And both Chomsky and Skinner had vigorous arguments over the years. And so by watching both of these videos, if you really want to learn more about the theories of motivation, I think you'll pick up a lot of interesting insights. So there is a debate, in psychology between behavioral and cognitive theories, and it continues. Another theory that is related but not discussed much is existentialism. And really it's related to philosophy. And it really means that, you need to take responsibility for living the life that you want. So, if you believe in existentialism, your motivation is based on you. It really doesn't come from anyone else. Carl Rogers was a famous researcher and psychologist, and he says that, to be motivated, you have to have direct experience. So I can't say, hey, it's going to be great, you're going to love it. No, you have to have the experience yourself. He said that things have to be congruent. It has to be clear to you why you're doing something for it to be, motivating to you. And he also said it's important to believe in people. There were many writers in history who supported this. But at the end of the day, the content, the process theories seem to have won over because they tend to be more efficient in terms of the short term, but I'm not so sure they're efficient long term. A few other ideas of motivation is that to be motivated, you really have to be interested. You know, if you're not interested in something, it's really hard, for anybody to force you to be motivated or to get you to be motivated. Things have to be relevant. You have to expect success. You have to be satisfied. So at the end of the day, if you're not interested, if the topic you're studying or the work you're doing isn't relevant to you, it's not important to you. And if you don't see any achievement possible and you're just not satisfied, you're not happy, it's going to be hard to be motivated. So motivational theory really deals with processes and structures that, help us, cause us to want to learn. So behavioralism is a term that really evolved out of process theories. And I've given you a few links to look at that I think you'll find very interesting. There were many studies done, mostly with animals, that by Watson and Thorndike and Skinner and others that led them to believe that again, that people are lazy, and unless you promise them a reward or threaten them with a punishment, they're going to do bad things. And so I encourage you to look at a couple of these videos to shape your learning. And like I said earlier, there have been some criticism of behavioralism, I think, which is warranted, since humans, we believe, have a larger communication capability, that what works on animals may not work always on people. One of the ways that we see behavioralism carried out at work, and especially at school, is through the idea of rewards. Lao Tzu, who is a famous Chinese philosopher, you could read his quote. Really what this says is, if you have people compete against each other, it's going to be hard to have everyone be motivated. And I say this in my lectures, that it's okay to compete between organizations, between companies, but not between people. Alfie Kohn, an amazing researcher. You could visit his site at alfiekahn.org. He's written some really interesting books, The Danger of Homework, Punished by Rewards. He says that, rewards really motivate people, but they just motivate people to want more rewards. I saw that in my corporate career where, the larger bonuses that managers got, the more they focused on those bonuses and nothing else. Yeah, think back to your own self, maybe in high school or your early college career. You had a test, you memorized it, and when the test was over, if you had to take the test all over again, you wouldn't remember anything. Again, because when there's a reward at stake, whether it's a grade or a monetary reward or any reward, we tend to be less creative. We tend to focus on the end result, the reward, not the learning, and not anything else. Kurt Lewin was a psychologist in the 30s, and he said that rewards motivate us not to succeed at the task, but to succeed at getting the award, as I just discussed. I'm not going to go through all the slides here. I have a lot of information for you. I'll let you read some of these on your own. I think one of the challenges with rewards is it really discourages people from learning. I've always said that I think grades get in the way of learning. When you focus on grades, you don't necessarily learn everything. But if you focus on learning, generally the grades will occur. I gave you a really good link. I think this is Dan Pink, who wrote a great book called Drive. And this is a great video that talks about his philosophy of and danger of rewards. So again, I'm going to skip some slides. You could read these on your own, as well as the other videos and articles on our platform that I've provided you. So the question is, as a manager, can you motivate someone, or as a parent, or as a boss, or as a teacher? I don't think so. But I think if you're not careful, you can damage motivation, which, with too much emphasis on praise and rewards and competitions, and if you do this or if you don't do this and so on. One exercise to do on your own, maybe with a group of friends, is to think about if you were going to start a new company, you're going to hire people, right? And you wanted them to do well, to help you make money, to be productive and motivated. How would you help them develop? How would you help them with their internal motivation if you could not punish and if you could not reward? As you go through this exercise, what you'll find is that, rewards and punishment cost a lot of money. And to not do those things do not cost a lot of money, but they cost time. So if you give people opportunities to learn, if you give people opportunities to do what they love, if you give opportunities of people to collaborate and not compete, with the fear of getting in trouble, all of those things really don't cost money, but they do cost an investment in time. So this on your own, I think, would be an interesting exercise to do. When you do this exercise, here's some assumptions you can make and so on. So I think it's important to establish, any system, parental system, a work system, a school system that's fair, that really gives people a chance to match those high challenges and skills, eliminates fear, and so on. On your own, I would like you to do this exercise and really take a piece of paper and think about, what motivates you. And think about what, be selfish here. Don't think about what you think you should write because your friends or parents or society have told you this is what should motivate you, but really write down, what are the 3 to 5 things that motivate you the most? And when you're through, I would like you to write down whether they're, for each one, put an I or an E. So is it an internal motivation? In other words, does it come from inside of you? Or is it an external motivation that comes from somewhere else? And just review your list. Many of your motivations, maybe all of them, will be a combination of both. But I think the long-term goal is to have more of your motivations that are internal. Internal motivation will last a lifetime. External motivation only lasts until the next, I like you, I love you, good job, here's a reward, here's a bonus, here's an A, and so on. So I encourage you to do this on your own. Now this slide, I want you to delete after I go over it with you. If you really wanted to demotivate people, here's a great set of ideas. Give money to only the winners. Of course, have lots of competition, too much praise. Discipline a lot of people, because when you discipline a lot of people, the people who are doing well will worry, am I next? Find out what people want to do, give them something else. Find out what people are good at or find out what people are interested in, and don't let them do that. Give people non-value added work. Find things that are just busy work and have people do these things. We see a lot of these things at work, and they typically do the opposite of what's intended. I think instead it's important to build, a culture of respect, a culture of coaching, which means asking questions. I think, the best thing to do is to teach people how to motivate themselves versus trying as a verb to motivate. And I think one way you do that is through coaching, which of course, is an investment, asking people questions. I think letting people work in the ways that fit them best is important for motivation. And I think more and more organizations are doing this, which is good. I think organizations that have, an inspiring business vision that, push decision-making down to the lowest possible level, I think all of those things, encourage worker motivation. I just want to, for a few minutes, touch on the differences in motivation between generations. I mean, they are getting closer, but it's important to know that, if you're working with someone who is of a different age than you, significantly, they are going to be motivated in different ways. I don't have up here the builder generation. These are people that are 70 years and older. Typically, those people work for one company, maybe your grandparents, and they retired and they got a pension and a gold watch, and that was it. Those people learned that they grew up in an era where, you know, you work hard, you get rewarded, and they typically were very loyal. The boomers, you know, adults that are 53 to 68, about 33 million. And I should say that's the 70 and over group. I want to say it's 17 or 18 million now, of course, in shrinking. The boomers are the most privileged and wealthiest generation in history. They're still working, much to the dismay of the younger generation. This group doesn't respond well to reward and punishment. You know, they want things that provide meaning and value. On the other hand, Generation X, you know, maybe your parents, you know, 38 to 52, 41 million people. This is US numbers. Really grew up, you know, I call it the MTV generation. You know, the highest rate of divorce was in this generation. Many entrepreneurs, but this generation grew up, you know, really used to reward and punishment, used to the idea that, you know, if I work hard enough, I should get more than somebody who doesn't work as hard as me. You know, survival of the fittest. So this was a hardworking generation. This generation probably responds really well to the idea of competition. In fact, you might ask someone in this generation and see what they say. We'll touch on this in a minute. I want to add something. Then we had the millenniums, or Gen Y. And nowadays, Gen Y, millenniums are kind of considered 24 to 32 years old. This group, of course, was raised by the boomers, over 71 million. So it's no surprise that this group probably also doesn't respond very well to reward and punishment. You know, I mean, they do want things that provide immediate satisfaction. Everybody gets should get a participation ribbon. This group generation grew up on social media and really is used to, you know, collaboration versus competition. Then we have Gen Z. This picture really doesn't paint the right profile. Gen Z today is really, it started out 7 and up, you know, 7 to 22, but today it's really considered to be around 18, sort of 18 to 20, 22, 18 to 23. They have yet to come up with a name that's stuck, you know, that's sticking for those that are under 18, but it's coming soon. But Gen Z adults were raised by those Gen X parents who grew up, you know, fighting for survival, if you will. So it's no surprise. It's very interesting to me that this generation, 23 million and growing, also is pretty competitive. You know, wants to make a lot of money, which everybody does. Nothing wrong with that, but isn't, you know, kind of against the notion of reward and punishment. And it's really no surprise because their parents were Gen Xers. I'm even noticing sometimes there can be some tension between the millennium generation, so those adults between, you know, say 25 and 30 versus those adults 18 and 22. There could be kind of, you know, the Gen Zers are pushing, wanting to compete, and the millenniums are like, yeah, you know, slow down a little bit. Let's work together. So it's just something I observe. Okay, the point of this is that, you know, when you're working with people, realize that, you know, based on the generation that you grew up, everyone is motivated differently. So let's try to summarize our learning from this lecture. I think that, you know, as I just said, each generation has different expectations. I think leaders are going to have to adapt and realize that not everybody is motivated the same way. I think the more we have coaches as leaders, the better people are going to be led to figure out what their own internal motivation is. I think at the end of the day, communication is key. If you want to find out what motivates someone, just ask them. You know, hey, what motivates you? When people are included and appreciated at work, motivation goes up, and when they're not, motivation goes down. That's another point I want you just to kind of think about. There are a lot of jobs that are going away for good. None of these jobs I've listed here should be any surprise to you. And so people are having to find new ways these days to find, for example, work that is both motivating with them and is also sustainable. And I've given you a link to kind of look at the world of work and where that's changing. But because of, global markets and just-in-time production, doing more with less, we have a huge shift in the way people work. In the U.S., we don't have much of manufacturing anymore. We're really a service-oriented economy in the U.S., and that's where most of the jobs are going. Clearly, the medical fields is the fastest growing field in America because people are aging, and they require medical services. We're seeing more startup businesses than ever before. Of course, as I like to teach, we're seeing the gig economy really rising. I think everyone should have multiple streams of income, and we finally reached a point in society where that's kind of acceptable. So I think despite, an up and down economy as I see it now, people still always want to, develop and grow, and they want opportunities to contribute. And they might not realize it, but they do want to match high challenges and high skills. And I think people will become more motivated, as you become more aware. So I think, what are some of the next steps? I think it's important to give people the opportunity to try different things, to do self-assessment, to help people figure out how, what are their abilities and interests, and how do they match those? And at the end of the day, I think it's important. You have to teach people how to motivate themselves. So that's it. I would like you to do some of these exercises on your own and think about your own motivation. And again, having a list of internal motivators will last you a lifetime. So this is worth something pondering. So day or night, whenever you're looking at this, I hope you're doing well, staying healthy, and I'll see you soon in class. Take care.